GM friends, say it back. Thank you, thank you. My name is Evin. I first fell into this magical world that we now call Web3 a little over 13 years ago when it was just Bitcoin. And I am so excited to share with you today a bit more about what we are building at Disco. So at Disco, we believe that you are the multifaceted center of the party, just as you are, and you should reflect your data and your identity to the world however you decide. Right now, there's a lot of talk about personalization enabled by AI, and so I want us to dig in together about what that looks like, what that means from the perspective of our keys and our public ledgers. And also, my DMs are open at any time if you want to tell me about your metaverse dreams. I can't wait to hear them and build them together with you. So first up, what is the metaverse, and who is controlling our experience of it? At Disco, we like to say that designers will inherit the metaverse because designers are the people who curate the experiences that we have as human beings. Our entire experience of a blockchain, unless we are down to the hardware, happens between the computer screen and our face. So it is intermediated by the experience of design, the buttons that we see and that we push, the information that we're able to read. At Disco, our definition of the metaverse, similar to what Justine was describing earlier, is your ability to show up in any digital or physical environment and enjoy a personalized experience based on the parts of yourself that you choose to share. So this is a little bit different than hanging out in someone else's website with an iPad strapped to your face, which is what most people think of when we say the word metaverse. So what does it mean for us to be able to create experiences such as this? Generally, when we talk about the experiences that we have on screen, these buttons that we see, they are reflecting data from a blockchain when we exist in the Web3 world. This means that every app is working on basically the same shared backend. It's slower and more expensive than the backends we have in Web 2, but it is equally accessible to everyone on Earth and in space with an internet connection, which means the only moat, the only differentiator when everyone has the same backend data is the design on the front. The way that that data is personalized for us to consume or curated in a manner that we can enjoy or derive value from. So how are we going to get to this awesome metaverse vision given where we are starting today? So let's back up for a second and remember, what is it that human beings like to do? What sorts of experiences draw us in and compel us? We are definitely propelled by the desire for immediacy. We have been raised by Steve Jobs in the app world, which means that when we click a button, we expect something to happen immediately, urgently, without waiting 15 minutes for some block to settle on the back end. It's not that our expectations change when we use Web3 apps. We are just consistently disappointed by the immediacy that we expect. Similarly, comfort. This is another thing that we learned from our use of Mac products is that when we are able to look upon trust cues or signals that we already know, we feel confidence in how we go about maneuvering that space. So quick show of hands, how many people feel super confident when they interact with their wallet? How many people feel empowered, expert, like they have zero questions and every single click makes them feel like an absolute boss? Very cool. So we have design work to do. Okay, we've got one baddie in the corner, and the rest of us are trying to sort out what EIP 712 signatures actually mean. So for those of us who cannot interact with it directly with the CLI, we're going to need some more translation. And then lastly, we need to contemplate value. Right now at Disco, we think about success as the amount of value and delight that we add to your experience and the amount of frustration, friction, and pain that we remove from it. Now, we need to consider that we are comparing these experiences against the Web 2 apps that we already use. And so the bar for the amount of dopamine, joy, serotonin, and stability that we can get from our app experiences has quite a ways to go. So if we want to think about the reasons that people love to use experiences, the reasons that make them feel good, how can we bring these traits into Web 3 so that we can build this metaverse? Right now, AI is a pretty impersonal information booth attendant. ChatGPT is like the stranger sitting at the desk at a mall who can answer your informational questions but doesn't know very much about you. So those answers are not going to be tailored to you. Right now, with AI systems, we are running into what is called the known universe problem, meaning that an experience can only be as personalized as the known universe of information about you that can inform that personalization. And right now, what information do I have about you when we look on chain? I know how much money you have, right? If I look out here and the only thing I know about all of you is your public keys, I don't see a bunch of cool new friends who I can discuss these topics with. I see piles of tokens. And you are much more than the contents of your wallet, right? You are whole people with interests and affinities, and that's not currently reflected. So we're hitting this known universe problem when we talk about personalizing experiences, digital, physical, let alone in this continuous journey that we might call a metaverse, because all I know about you is how much money you have. So, for example, if you were to look at my financial transactions, you would think that my favorite activity is paying rent. She does it every month. The number keeps going up. No matter where she is, she keeps doing this action. And so when we look to something like a blockchain, we don't actually have context for whether or not you enjoyed doing those actions on chain, whether those NFTs that were airdropped to you were wanted and welcome, or whether someone was trying to bully you. So we know that on-chain data is not enough to personalize things in an accurate way. Otherwise, we would only be offered experiences that allow us to pay, which right now is pretty much the only thing that you can do on chain. So let's think about what is all of the data that could be part of this known universe? Where does it come from? Where does it live? So if we look on chain right now, we've got fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens, but as we just discussed, only financial data, only financial transactions for the most part. Now, the most of the information that makes you, you, does not live on a blockchain. In the EU or places like Chile or Canada or the state of California, it's even illegal to put data about a human being on chain. So when most of the data that gives you your personality, describes your interests, affiliations, accomplishments, and preferences does not live on chain, and only your money does, how do we create a known universe of information large enough to make a metaverse fun, to make your experiences more than informed by your financial capabilities? So imagine that you could bring more than just financial data to personalize an AI-enabled experience. What if you were asking questions to ChatGPT and it knew your preferred pronouns, your primary language, your food allergies when you asked for a restaurant recommendation? How might we bring more than just our money in a self-sovereign way to inform personalized experiences that can carry with us across applications, across chains, from Web 2 to Web 3? Right now, I think that we are missing 3 key ingredients to the ability to show up in any digital or physical environment and enjoy that personalized experience subject to our preference. First up, we're going to need some more data. So all of that stuff that sits beneath the surface of that iceberg, that can come to the party and help inform the known universe of information that AI can consume to personalize our interactions. We also need signature resolution. We need to know where data comes from to determine whether or not it's relevant or valid to us, whether or not we trust it. And I know we use the word trustless a lot here in the Web3 space, but let us remember that we are building human coordination tools. Being able to resolve a signature to tell who said what about whom has been part of how we interpret information since the dawn of humanity. And so when it comes to data about us that is not purely objective and financial and quantitative in nature, inherently we must involve some trust. And then lastly, consent. Right now, if I have your public key, I can map anything I want to it without your consent, participation, or desire. So we're going to dig into in a minute about what consent can mean in a Web3 environment of self-curation. So first up, interoperable non-financial data. If we want to be able to move seamlessly from one digital environment to another, that means the data that describes us should come with us. Right now, it doesn't. We're in an incredibly siloed landscape, and that's why most app experiences start with you filling out a form. I'm from the United States, and as Americans, we spend 11.5 billion hours a year filling out forms. It's quite a lot of time, quite a lot of effort, quite a lot of redundant, centralized stores of data that cannot move with us, that are not logically centralized around us, but rather trapped in the places where they were created, treated as the business asset of those apps and not the dignified work product of our labor. So we know that data that is tied to a single blockchain is optimized for use in that chain ecosystem, but we as human beings are not bound to a single protocol. I bet just today, some of you have used both TCP/IP and HTTPS, maybe the Ethereum protocol, maybe some scaling solutions and beyond. But you as a person have not been stopped, halted from being able to interact with other protocols. You just have to manually re-enter or re-engage your data every time you show up to a new one. And so I'm sure it feels like an 11.5 billion hours a year of filling out forms for a lot of us. Furthermore, we need to acknowledge that most of the data that describes us, as we noted under the surface of that iceberg, is in Web 2, is not in a form that we can extract and bring with us, despite the fact that we made it. It describes us, and in certain countries, we even have rights over it. So let us recall that you are more than the contents of your wallet, right? You are more than the things that you buy and the financial gifts you've been given. And so your traits, your preferences, your achievements should be able to help you bootstrap filling out some of those forms, should help you lower the switching costs of moving from one DAO to another, of getting a new job, of joining a new community, because you should be able to carry around data that is written about you, and other parties should be able to decide whether they trust that data, whether it's relevant to them, without phoning home to the person who said it, because that's wildly inefficient. This is how we are able to create reputation. If I can collect statements over time that describe my contributions, my abilities, and my skills, I can flex those in a new spot as soon as I show up without having to fill out a form and self-attest what it is that I've been up to. So common standards, we were talking about earlier, common standards are the shared data language that allow me to create data in one application or one protocol environment and carry it with me to the next. We should not hyper-centralize data to the protocol where it was made. Rather, we should logically centralize data around its subject, around the person or party it describes, and physically decentralize where that data goes to sleep at night so that we can retain it, engage it when and where it makes sense for us. Lastly, portability is enabled by safe storage. What that means is that you need to pack up a piece of data if you want to carry it with you in a form that is not trapped to a single protocol, in a form that is not inextricable from a given underlying storage solution. So, as a quick reminder, what are the packages that we can put data inside of that can make it portable? How can we pack up data with our keys and carry it with us? So we are all probably pretty familiar with fungible and non-fungible tokens, but some of you might not realize that there's actually a third type of data, a little packet, a little asset that you can carry around with your existing Web3 keys. So on-chain tokens are public, immutable, transferable. They can interact with smart contracts, and you really can't control who else can get access to a given one of these assets unless they're modified once they're released out into the world. The unfettered secondary market of tokens is what makes this whole system run. But they're not an appropriate container for data that describes you. Blockchains are open APIs, equal opportunity surveillance apparatuses, and so putting data in a public token means that it's accessible to everyone on Earth and in space with an internet connection for all time, right? Till that blockchain fails or the heat death of the universe. This means that we forfeit consent over data that goes into these assets or that is communicated in this way. So it's not really a useful manner for us to express ourselves or to describe traits that pertain to us specifically, where we want to share them in certain circumstances and not in others. So I'm excited to introduce to you the third game piece in Web3, the third thing you can carry around with your keys, send to others, receive, and share, and those are called verifiable credentials. So verifiable credentials are statements written by one party about another, signed by the keys of the party who said it. They can be set to expire, they can be revoked, they can be written by more than 150 different kinds of keys and resolved or read by anyone with an internet connection, regardless of what protocol, Web 2 or Web 3, that they might be using. You could even print them out on a piece of paper or tattoo them on your arm. They are just files like PDFs, just JSON blobs, sets of code that contain encrypted statements. Because they are tamper-proof, tamper-evident, they cannot be modified after they are created. And so this gives us a sort of hack-proof way to carry around statements that we write about ourselves, that other people write about us. So today, verifiable credentials are used by universities as digital diplomas. They are used by LinkedIn as a way to prove that you are an employee of a certain entity. They are used by Xbox to manage payment to independent game studios. They are used by the Cash App team to explore what portable KYC can look like and have actually been the backbone of portable KYC in Europe since 2018. Fortunately, there is a lot of excitement around interoperability for data based on these standards because, well, a few reasons. In addition to being gas-free, you could make 1 million of these, 1 billion credentials for less gas than it costs to move an NFT from one wallet to another on a scaling solution. But furthermore, they can be consent first. So let's think about, how we can express these, and just a real quick rundown in case anybody wants our little plus and minus chart, right? Tokens are easily transferable. They're public to everyone. Credentials are shared with your consent. And once they are written about you, like a diploma, it will always be written about you. So really great container for data that describes us. Really great way for us to determine where things come from and who we want to share them with. At Disco, this is what they look like, all compressed and then expanded all the way out. So friendly little rectangular JPEGs that look and feel a lot like NFTs, but have no marginal network fees and can be translated by just about anybody. So let's return to our to-do list. What else do we need to make a metaverse? We've covered interoperable non-financial data. We know we need more information about one another. Next up, we're going to need signature resolution. How do we tell where data came from? And if you're not able to see this, this is a little permission slip written by a child. It says parent signature, and the name is mom. The date is today. So not a super legit signature. And so it's important for us to contemplate who is it that we trust to be an authority on certain subjects, and what does that mean for our use of this data? So right now, on-chain data doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate. We were discussing earlier how on-chain data lacks context. Just because someone has published it publicly doesn't mean it's real. So for example, if you were to check out my ENS address, evin.eth, you would see that it is mapped to @Paris Hilton on Twitter. The link clicks through, it's in clear text on the chain, everyone on Earth and in space can see it, and yet somehow I am not Paris Hilton. And that is the difference between understanding where data comes from, who said it, and trusting that party to be an authority on the subject. So the nice thing about verifiable credentials is that they have resolvable signatures, meaning that you can tell who wrote that statement. You can associate that statement with their website, with their Twitter handle, with their Discord to provide you additional context as well. And so the ability to have data that is written about us, that describes our traits and preferences, that comes from sources that we want to leverage and that other parties trust and see as relevant, that expands the known universe of information that we can use to personalize our experience. It expands the known universe of data that AI can leverage to provide us with a closer reach toward the metaverse. And then lastly, this element of consent is very important for us to talk about because blockchains are a consent-free environment. When we put data on chain, we forfeit consent, meaning that we make it accessible to everyone. When we create a public key pair, we allow any other party, those we know, those we don't know, to send whatever they want to our wallet. Anyone can map any token ID to your public key without your consent and participation. Now, sometimes that's wanted and welcome, like a nice fat airdrop. But sometimes it's unwanted and unwelcome, like bullying. And right now, there is very little context or tea leaf reading beyond very large distributions of tokens that can help us determine, for a specific atomic transaction, is this an accurate depiction of the wallet holder or not? So For example, how many of you have ever received an NFT without intentionally trying to go get it? Like, have you ever been airdropped an NFT in your OpenSea wallet that you did not expect? So I think that's likely to happen more and more, especially with how brands look at our wallets like junk mail slots, where they can send whatever they want. Now, it seems pretty elitist that the only way to get rid of unwanted assets that were given to you is to pay to get them out of your wallet. And so self-curation is now a privilege of the wealthy. Self-curation, the ability to jettison unwanted assets, is now a privilege of the highly technically literate. I know for me, I've been working and hanging out and goofing around this space for over a decade, and I don't want to touch the weird assets that end up in my wallet because interacting with them, even trying to burn them, could do something kind of funny that doesn't make me feel good or confident about what's going to roll out next. And so without this consent layer, the more junk that we get sent to our wallets, the lower assurance our public addresses become of an accurate depiction of who we are. So consent, the act of self-curation, helps us decide which parts of ourselves to share and which parts not to share to make sure that the experiences we receive, the way that we are perceived, is accurate, is to our liking, is in a way that serves us. Similarly, I'm sure that all of you, being attentive and thoughtful audience members, are showing a different part of yourselves that I will see at the party later this evening. And that selective disclosure, that ability to curate how you show up, is not available on-chain alone, but when we talk about verifiable credentials, there is an opportunity. So with Disco and with many different teams that handle these off-chain data assets, when you receive a credential about you, it's almost as though you're receiving mail through your mail slot in an envelope. It's encrypted against your keys, so only you can open it, and only you can decide to make it public and share it with others. So you can receive a bunch of statements written about you from friends, colleagues, statements you write about yourself. You can choose which ones you would like to share that are the most relevant, that are the best of you. In this way, I think of the off-chain data that you can carry around with your keys as an example of the best of what others have to say about you, the best of what you have to say about yourself. And on-chain data, that's a collection of anything that anyone wants to say about you, whether or not you like it. So it lacks context. It provides us with a strange known universe that is not complete to all of the things that make our experiences fun, that deliver experiences in our native language, using our preferred pronouns, in the style of music that we enjoy, or the physical spaces where we feel at home. So, I think a lot about what are the design principles that can help us build this seamless journey, moving from one app to another, moving from one web to another without worrying about the underlying protocol. How do we maintain our ability to share ourselves in a manner that is relevant? So one of the core principles here, once we have default private data where we can decide who we want to share it with, is minimum disclosure. Minimum disclosure is just a fancy phrase for sharing it on a need-to-know basis. Your data is a valuable asset that describes you, and when you give it away, you diminish the moat that you have around yourself to define your preferences and keep them up to date. Minimum disclosure means that your data should be shared in the relevant amount required to remove friction and add delight, to save you time and effort in onboarding so that you can spend less time filling out forms and staring into the nightmare rectangle and more time getting on with your adventures. Furthermore, because credentials allow for revocation and expiry, they can manage their own state. I'm pretty sure that most of you did not apply to your most recent job with your 2008 MySpace profile. That is because your identity is not fixed and public and permanent. You are not obligated to be the same person you were 30 seconds ago, and you never meet the same person twice, certainly not in the same body. But that's not true on-chain, where we are held accountable to all of the on-chain actions that we have performed because, remember, there's no context. They are legible forever, and when you present your wallet address, they all are able to be recalled by anyone with access to an Alchemy node. And so the ability to have data that describes you that maybe is relevant for a period of time and expires, that's a way that you can also curate. That's also a way that you can manage access control. So for communities that have seasonal memberships, for communities that want to allow their members to disclose their participation without default doxing them, these capabilities are an awesome new superpower. They provide some nuance for how we can show up in our different environments and how we can control the known universe about us that is exposed to something like an algorithm providing personalization. And then lastly here, we know that context enables commercial safety. So commercial safety is sort of a buzzword about AI these days, basically asking the question, what data was this algorithm trained on? Where did it come from? Do we think that there's bias in that original training set, as with government records of criminal activities, or even with the skin tones that facial recognition algorithms are trained on? So the ability to have signed data in the form of credentials or other forms of attestations that form the known universe of information that informs an AI, that helps us to understand what is the perspective that these recommendations bring. Did we have permission to interact with those training sets? And what is the extent of their validity, as opposed to just yeeting all the data that we can find into a machine learning algorithm and hoping that what comes out is the sum of expertise in the world and not the sum of what 4chan has had to say recently. So what does this look like? What does this feel like? At Disco, we allow you to use your existing Ethereum-compatible keys to issue, request, disclose, and manage credentials that look pretty friendly, just like the ones we had expanded before. So without having to pay gas fees, without having to default to public, we've got some new primitives that can allow us to curate a little bit more effectively. For example, you'll see in my data backpack, I've got my membership to Boys Club, which is a global community of women and non-binary people. This credential issued by Boys Club's keys associated with their Twitter handle, which is why we have a human readable identifier up there. This actually allows me to access benefits in physical space, such as showing up at events. I can use it to interact with smart contracts, enter Telegram chats, Discord channels, and even enjoy e-commerce discounts and shopping online. So everywhere that you can use a token, you can also use a credential for access control or even a combination. So what this allows us is, again, more nuance in the known universe that we present. So I invite you to imagine again, what if the next time that you interacted with ChatGPT or similar, you weren't just speaking to an impersonal information booth attendant, an impersonal but very well-researched robot? What if you were speaking to a party that you consented to share something about yourself with so that your recommendations could be personalized, where you wouldn't have to specify through the labor of all these prompts every single time, like you fill out forms with a new app, but rather you could meet this counterparty like a friend, like a colleague, but you establish the rules around how that information can be shared. You establish the boundaries around that personalization and the way in which you want to show up in different environments. So if we have interoperable data that shows more than our money, if we have the ability to tell where that data comes from so our communities can interpret it differently, like in this room versus at the party later, and if we have consent so that we can self-curate in an equitable way, not a financially biased plutocratic way, then I think we have the recipe for showing up in any digital or physical environment and enjoying a personalized experience based on the parts of ourselves that we choose to share. We can bust open the myth that the only way to express ourselves is publicly, financially, and on-chain because we can do more with our keys than just throw money at each other. So my name is Evin McMullen. I am so excited to help build this metaverse with all of you. I welcome all of your questions, your ideas, and thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it, guys, and I'll see you in the metaverse.